like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. I got my head held high, I'm on my signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place.
Welcome to the National University of Singapore Yonglu Lin School of Medicine's Healthy Longevity webinar. Thanks for joining us again. We're doing a little bit something different tonight. We have two speakers instead of one, and they're going to give a very interesting talk that I'll tell you about in a minute. So I want to remind you to use the Q&A function, and Jessica will assemble all those great questions and ask our speakers. Because we have two speakers, we're taking a slightly different format tonight. We're not going to have one of our usual beginning presentations from one of the members of our Center for Healthy Longevity. They'll be coming back next week, though, so don't fret. And so tonight we have two speakers from McKinsey Health Institute, Hemant Ahlawat, who is the senior partner in McKinsey's Zurich office and one of the global leaders in the McKinsey Health Institute, which is a nonprofit generating entity that partners with other organizations to address some of the world's greatest health challenges. I bet you can't guess which one they're going to talk about tonight. Hemant is a global leader within McKinsey's pharmaceutical and medical products practice and has also worked with UN agencies and governments on a range of topics, including antimicrobial resistance, pandemics, polio eradication, and process improvements on vaccination plans. Madeline is an associate partner in McKinsey's Melbourne office and again, one of the global leaders in McKinsey's Health Institute's Healthy Aging campaign. She's a core member of the McKinsey Australian healthcare practice and advises private, not-for-profit, and public sector clients on a range of strategy, transformation, and operations topics with a distinct focus on aging and elderly care. So we're very lucky tonight because they're going to present the results from a recent global health aging survey by the Health Institute and with a specific focus on Singapore. So welcome to the show, both of you, and we're looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having us, first of all, Brian, and good to see more than 230 participants here. So hello to everyone. As Brian mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the survey we have done recently on healthy aging, and we have some breaking results from that because the survey is actually still being analyzed, and we did some initial cut of the data to get that out. I need to get the light up here. And what we'll do is also then, in addition to sharing some broad results from that, we will also zoom into parts of that results from Singapore. And then happy to take some Q&A. Before we get into that, I thought we'll just quickly introduce what the McKinsey Health Institute is about, so people know about that. You made a brief description of that, Brian. McKinsey Health Institute, as you mentioned, Brian, is a nonprofit generating entity within McKinsey. We've for a very long time had a McKinsey Global Institute, which was doing research and insights into the overall economic situation across industries and sectors. And, over the last years, and especially post the pandemic, with the increased focus on health, we have set up an institute dedicated to health. And as you can see there, one of our founding beliefs is, and which is quite central to the conversation around aging, is that we have the potential together to add 45 billion extra years of higher quality life. That's essentially 6 years of higher quality life, either by extending life or increasing the quality of the time we live on average per person over time. And we believe that it requires multiple dimensions to come through, and healthy aging would be a critical part of that. The Institute tries to advance 4 different elements. I won't mention all of them. I think the way we think about it is we need to come together to do further research, understand what works, how do you stimulate innovation. So we partner with many people, come out with perspectives and research, survey on some topics, some of which we will see today, and then try to convene people to get to action. If we go to the next page, I'll talk a little bit about just some of the themes we focus on. Obviously, healthy aging is a prominent one you see there. There are 6 other themes we focus on. You'll see 6 of them there. And many of them interlinked to the concept of aging, especially if you look at things around brain health, health equity across countries. Aging varies quite dramatically across countries, both in terms of the population which would be aging, as well as the health in which they would be doing so, healthy living in the modern understanding of health, and very importantly, the idea of capacity. So these are 7 pillars which MHI is focusing on for now, and they interlink, and all of them come together in the concept of healthy aging. And then maybe let me just quickly go to the next page and introduce the idea of how do we talk about healthy aging. And Brian, your work on it and the center's work on it has actually been a great source of inspiration for us as well. We look at it as obviously increasing years or health span, not just the lifespan, because the focus on not only extending life, but also in good physical, mental, cognitive, social, and spiritual health is critical. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we look at all the 5 different elements as super critical. And you will see in the results, Madeline would share in a minute, what's fascinating is while we focus a lot on physical and mental dimensions of health, elements of social and spiritual, including things like purpose, actually come across quite highly. And as we talk to people about how they value good health. And then finally, the last point I'd emphasize in our understanding on aging is this point of full capacity. The idea is not just to extend life, but to also optimize functionality. Can people interact with their environment and live a full life? So with that, and without much ado, I suggest we dive into this survey we've done, what it is about, what are some of the results, and then let's have a discussion around that. So Madeline, over to you.
Thanks, Hemant. Maybe we go to the next page. So since launching the Healthy Aging Initiative about 8 months ago, we've focused on 3 things. First, publishing our foundational perspective, which is called Living Longer and in Better Health, and we're proud that it's now on our website. And it frames global aging as a positive phenomenon and promotes the life course approach to health. Second, we launched a survey in 21 countries to build a fact base around older adult health, which is the focus of today's conversation. And in our survey, we covered 4 main buckets: self-reported health status across social, spiritual, physical, and mental health domains, rating across 54 influencing factors like I get a good night's sleep, or I have access to public transportation, topic-specific questions around participation, care, and brain health, and finally, demographic and lifestyle questions like living status. And the third thing we focused on is conducting research into one topical area, which is the societal participation of older adults, which we can take you through at a later stage. So all of our data from our survey was collected actually last week, and we're in the process of mining about 25 million lines of data. Today, we are sharing early insights for the very first time, so congratulations. And this is a small excerpt of what we hope to share later on in the next 2 months. We're hopeful that today's discussion will help shape which areas we should dive into further, so looking forward to your questions. There are 3 emerging themes from these early results, and we'd like to take you through those today. The first is that survey respondents indicate that purpose is the influencing factor most strongly correlated with overall health. Though when we cut the data by country income archetype, that doesn't hold constant across all countries. Second, that there's a substantial opportunity to engage older adults more across the globe, across employment, learning, volunteering programs, and community programs. And third, our data suggests that health status is actually is related to living situation. So if you are living with others, you have higher reported health status. I'd like to take you through the first theme, maybe on the next page. The theme is that purpose matters once you have the basics in place. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see the top factors out of the 54 that we asked respondents about. And on the right, you see them grouped into categories to show the difference in strength of the correlation coefficient to overall health status. And these buckets sort of indicate the relative importance to overall health. And the insights here are that having a purpose in life is significant. It stands above all the others as the top bucket. Second, that engagement drivers like social engagement and connection with friends, volunteering and such are very strongly linked to good health status. And finally, that influencing factors like engaging in exercise, which is sort of second from the bottom you see there on the left, is important and is still strongly correlated to good health, but maybe it's not sufficient on its own. Now, when we segment respondents into country archetypes based on income levels, we start to see a difference between high-income countries where purpose has the strongest correlation to overall health and low-income countries where it falls into the lowest bucket of significant drivers. Taken with the influencing factors that correlate most strongly in low and middle income countries where you see regular exercise, getting a good night's sleep, and relationship with others, this implies to us that purpose matters, but only once you have the basics in place. And given the audience here, we wanted to make sure that we show some Singapore-specific cuts of the data. And respondents from Singapore are largely aligned with what we found and the global findings. Purpose is strongly correlated, and stress and connections with friends are also sort of top 5. Interestingly, on the left, you'll see that Singapore includes feels perspective as an older adult is valued, whereas that doesn't show up in the global findings. This indicates to us that older adults in Singapore are more valued and respected than in other places across the world. Globally, we see a few societal inclusion factors that are ranked highly that actually don't show up in the Singapore top buckets. Things like volunteering, participating in learning and upskilling. And our hypothesis is that these programs in Singapore, access to these programs is actually more equitable than in other places, meaning that it's not as strong a differentiator of good versus poor health status. Interesting, we'll dig into that more as we go through the data. Our second theme is about the opportunity to engage older adults in society. So our definition of societal participation includes employment, it includes volunteering, so not getting paid for your contribution, education, and community leisure. What's interesting is that respondents in low and middle income countries report higher levels of societal participation than their peers in the rest of the world. This to us implies an opportunity to increase engagement with older adults in higher income countries. And very interestingly, and we'll dig into this a little bit later, participation in volunteering and education is nearly 2 times higher in lower income countries than it is in high income countries. So when we dug into employment, we asked respondents 2 simple questions. We asked about their work status. So are you working? Yes or no? And their desire to work. Do you want to work? Yes or no? And what we found was that approximately 1 in 5 older adults reported that they are not working, but that they want to. This implies to us that there's a significant untapped labor pool that would be an opportunity for the globe to take advantage of. And across country archetypes, high-income countries and low-income countries, we saw similar themes in terms of the barriers to employment around difficulty finding jobs. We used these findings to calculate a directional benefit for the globe. So we thought, if we know that 18% of older adults in high-income countries want to work, we can then calculate how that would grow the total labor force and how that workforce boost would translate to GDP. Marrying these 2 things together, we calculate that there's around a $4 trillion opportunity to grow GDP globally by engaging these older adults in employment. This, of course, assumes that the incremental employment doesn't displace workers that are working today, and it also assumes a haircut of around 5% of unemployment. These numbers are illustrative, but the significance of the opportunity is remarkable. We follow the same logic for volunteering. So we asked older adults in our survey, do you volunteer and do you want to volunteer? And we found that more older adults want to volunteer and are not than want to work and are not. So we think that this is a significant opportunity, particularly in low and middle income countries, to engage older adults in volunteering. In Singapore, we segmented the population by income status, and we found that the least affluent Singaporeans are involved in education at 2 times the rate of other wealth cohorts. Unsurprisingly, the least affluent are also engaged in employment more than the other cohorts. And regarding the wealthy, the only cohort where the wealthy are the least active, are not the most active, is in community leisure programs. So when we looked at the matrix that you saw earlier around employment for Singapore, we found that 23% of respondents in Singapore indicated that they want to work but aren't. And compared to high income countries, that's a little bit higher than the average that we showed before of 18%. And barriers are similar in Singapore than what we see across the globe. In Singapore, poor health status doesn't deter older workers. So in fact, those that want to work but are not working report a higher health status than those that want to work and are working. So the potential to work is true across the board. And we also looked at these numbers for Singapore specifically in volunteering. So 31% of respondents indicated that they want to volunteer and are not. That's similar to employment. That's higher than the global average of around 26. We also found similar themes around lack of attractive opportunities and stating health issues as barriers to volunteering in Singapore and across the globe. We want to take you through our third and final observation from the data, which is that health status is related to living situation. So we looked at self-reported health status and related to living situation. And we found that those that are living alone reported lower physical and mental health status. And we show this here in Singapore and across comparative countries like Sweden and Japan. We found that 80% of the respondents in Singapore are actually living with others, which is much higher than almost any other country in the that we surveyed, and that they have a much higher self-reported health status than those that are living alone. So the 5 things we sort of want you all to take away from this presentation is, as Hemant mentioned, we're interested in adding years to life, so increasing longevity across the globe, but that's not not enough. It's essential to also add sort of healthy life to years by expanding health status, and that's the overall goal that we want to drive in MHI's sort of healthy aging. The second is that the modern understanding of health requires going beyond the physical. And we found that in the survey findings that social, spiritual, and mental health status is very important to all of our respondents. We also discussed purpose being important, but different in high income versus low income countries, and that there's a significant opportunity to engage older adults more in society, 18% potentially in employment and up to 26% in volunteering. And finally, we looked at health status as related to living status, and we found that living with others aligns with better health. These are the sort of first sets of insights that we have from this survey, and we hope that you'll tune into a future session where we can share the more detailed results. And in the meantime, please visit our website on mckinsey.com/MHI to find more about the Health Institute. Thank you very much.
Before I forget, we'll put that QR code on our credits tonight. So if you didn't get it that quickly, and I guess most of you probably didn't, you can stay tuned after the show and get the QR code. So thanks a lot for the presentation. I think it's really interesting to hear what's going on. You know, you mentioned this already, Hemant, but, you know, in looking at the 7 pillars that you're focusing on, it's really difficult, I think, to decide whether aging is a vertical or a horizontal because it plays so intimately into most of those pillars. So, you know, I would imagine aging insights will come out of some of the work of the other groups as well. So maybe you can comment a little more about that.
You know, absolutely, Brian, as you mentioned, and as I said earlier. And it's interesting, I was looking at, and I know we'll get to some of these later, I was looking at some of the Q&A as Madeline was going through it. And I think this question keeps coming back on how do we think about living longer versus living healthier? And many of the themes we pick up, mental health as an example. And for those who have not seen, if you look at our foundational article, you can find it on the website. We actually focus quite a bit on mental health's impact, of course, on aging, dementia, loneliness, depressive disorders, etc. So there's a very strong interlinkage there. Health equity, this point of high income versus low income countries, which Madeline was talking about, and obviously not only the lifespan, but also the healthy lifespan varies so dramatically, as we know. The burden of or the advantages of aging, as we know, vary widely between countries. The situation in Japan or Europe is very different from, let's say, Africa or Ghana. So I think many of the themes we talk about interconnect, and you're totally right. That's why we call out healthy aging as almost a separate, it's a theme, but it will actually cut across everything. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just want to build on that. In terms of the survey results, we talked today about the country income archetypes, high, medium, and low. And we're also segmenting countries in terms of healthy age life expectancy at 60, to also think about health status and healthy longevity and compare results between those different groups of countries.
Yeah, I think that'll be very interesting. I mean, one of the things you mentioned from your initial report that I thought was really important to emphasize was that talking about global aging is a positive phenomenon. When I started talking about, I was doing yeast aging research and not thinking about humans at all for a long time. And then as I got closer to human aging, I started talking about silver tsunami and things that got picked up in the language from the demographic changes that are happening. Then I realized that was a big mistake because, the opportunities of an aging population are often forgotten, and still they're often forgotten. People look at these demographic changes as a burden and while it certainly creates challenges, I think their opportunities are pretty intriguing as well. So maybe you can comment a little bit on that. So.
Yeah, maybe a quick comment, and Madeline, please add. Actually, I find this, the 2x2 grid we were seeing, quite fascinating. And I think it's not only the opportunity, but also the untapped potential. It's and it's not about, forced employment. This is actually a pent-up desire in people to be still active. And we are living healthier lives across the world for longer periods of time, and people want that to be functional. So we draw the cut at 55. Actually, we've been looking at the data further as well. If you look even above 65, by the way, it's also quite interesting to see. And I also like the emphasis between, this whole idea of a healthier aging population also able to transmit back to the younger generation, which is where some of the comments Madeline was making about community work, education, formal or informal ways to be involved. It's a huge untapped opportunity, and I think it happens in silos, but it's not fully linked in. So it's the concept of a healthier lifespan, and the longer we live in that, is an opportunity not only of direct impact on society, but also indirectly helping the next generation in many ways to come, the support infrastructure which goes with it. And then maybe the last comment I'd make is the impact of that, which will be, we've not done it yet, but will be interesting to correlate, is the impact of that community on the social well-being of societies. And you see an echo of that in our survey when people talk about living alone versus living with others and how that actually works together. So I think it's a huge opportunity without a doubt. Madeline,
the only thing I'd add to that is that we're really excited about this work in its contribution of elevating volunteering, lifelong learning, and social inclusion to the same level as employment, because often when we talk about the opportunity related to aging, it's around engaging older adults in formal employment. And that just doesn't work for everyone. And that's okay. And you can get health and societal benefits from engaging in other ways. And that's something we're really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that jumped out at me was that purpose was more important than financial status. I think that when you talk to governments, who, in Singapore, one of them, but certainly not the only one, they're thinking about how to deal with a large population over the age of 65. One of the first things they talk about is financial status. And I think that obviously that's a concern for seniors, but I think that the emphasis needs to be more on purpose, and engagement, empowerment. And I guess it wasn't that surprising to me that came out of the survey, but I think that's a really important thing for people to pick up on, is they're talking about how to, change policies in the government to help this generation.
You also how to act on that. Sorry, go ahead, Madeline.
I was going to say that the relative strength of financial status differs, and we'll be able to show this at a later date, but didn't have the slides today, differs in countries where there's a public health system versus not. Really interesting to see the relationship there.
I want to say just on this purpose, Brian, actually, Madeline and I have spent in the last, as Madeline mentioned, this is a bit hot off the press. We're frankly still analyzing the data. And we've spent the last 4 or 5 days going back and forth on what's coming out and purpose being on top and what does that mean. And, one of the things we want to be careful about was not to diminish the importance of the essentials on healthy aging, right? Which is exercise, sleep, nutrition, basic financials, friendship, as Madeline mentioned. So it's critical. I think what's interesting to see, because this is at the end of the day, we take out derived importance, but it is people self-reporting. And this shows the perception beyond a certain level of essentials of this idea of purpose. And as we all know, purpose can be quite subjective. You can find purpose in many different ways. And therefore, at one level, it's easy to influence because you can actually get different paths to it. At another level, it's harder to have a program on. You can't go and say, well, let's actually provide a purpose to every person. So I think this is a very interesting conversation to have, as you mentioned, with governments to think about how do you create that? And at least personally, I come back to this concept of social inclusion and community as one way of providing purpose, education, etc. But yeah, it's actually quite fascinating that almost consistently it comes right on top.
Yeah, and I think even things like formal education programs, like going back to universities or having other access to education programs that are specifically tailored for people at this stage of life. People have thought about that, but I haven't really seen it employed yet in any way that's meaningful. And I think that comes back to this point because, helping people find purpose is important. I mean, it's not as if they know what they want necessarily and they don't have it. I think that there's a huge transition that happens, particularly with retirement. And you're right, purpose is unique to the individual, but there are ways, I think, to facilitate people finding their own path to that. And it seems really important to pay attention to that.
One of the things on that topic, one of the things that we want to explore is the potential of interventions like mid-career reviews. So being able to look back sort of dispassionately over your life and almost come up with your autobiography and do that also looking forward at important stages in your life helps you think about what do you want your purpose to be and align how you engage and how you live towards that. And that's a moment of reflection that most older adults don't have the benefit of having. And maybe that's the type of social program that would be beneficial if implemented at scale.
Yeah. I think it's okay that we don't talk as much about exercise and nutrition. We talk about that all the time on this show. So the guests are probably happy we're talking about something, or the listeners are probably happy we're talking about something else tonight. But obviously those things are essential, and from my perspective on a medical side, really that a lot of this goes hand in hand. If you're not, if you don't have enough health, what you're thinking about is very different than if you are still relatively healthy. One of the things that also strikes me, though, is that when you talk to people and you look at their health status, often it can look, quite bad from the outside. But when you talk to individuals, they're still very positive as they get older often, and they are still talking about things like purpose. So I think attitude is such an important element. I don't know, were you able to sort of capture positive attitude as a factor in the questionnaire?
I'm not sure that we captured that directly, but to the point of purpose, it actually the picture started to change when we segmented the data by age cohort as well. So we saw purpose is very strong in the 55 to 65 and 65 up to 80. But once you got to 80, relationships mattered more, and mobility and other things that kind of go back to basics, and purpose drops down on the list. So it's interesting to see how that changes over the life course as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I notice is that when people get up in that, 75, 80 range, a lot of people believe that, well, exercise and nutrition, these are not going to help anymore. I'm past that point, which is not true, by the way. But I think there's that perception out there. And maybe that is a transition point that we don't think enough about, that the social connectivity is just going to get more increasingly important as you get older. And, that's a challenge now, because the way people connect socially is changed a lot, and it's less accessible to people in those older age ranges. So another important topic to think about. Singapore has spent a lot of effort trying to think about creating an environment for healthy aging, as well as what we do, which is more directly targeting the biology of healthy aging. And I think this survey will be very critical to look through and come up with ideas about, because, a lot of these things we're just making statements based on intuition, and there haven't been enough surveys like this. I'm just curious. Go ahead,
Brian, if I may, that's actually, and also some of the questions people are asking, how do we plan to use the data, and will this be available? So obviously we're going to go through further analysis, and we will be publishing and sharing it more widely. But exactly to your point, I think the idea, in some of the foundational work we did on healthy aging, we talked about 6 shifts. And one of them was really about this idea of better measurement, better data, because, we all have, frankly, fairly well-founded and intuitively right, thoughts, ideas, attitudes about healthy aging. Most of them are directionally correct. Most of them are magnitudinally correct too. But I think we just need to do more to understand it at a concrete level, stratify it, understand what are the differences, et cetera, et cetera. And then maybe just one other comment to your point of social inclusion and how we now, communicate with each other and how communities function. One of the shifts we talk about is the unleashing the potential of all industries to help with healthy aging. So people can look at tech and say, well, what are the elements it has which actually decreases some of that connection, given, but it's also, of course, a huge positive, the ability to stay in touch across distances, especially for older, as aging individuals. And I think, therefore, the idea is same as aging as we talked about, to take a positive look at these things and say, what do we unleash with that, which is actually a positive versus just the challenges.
I think that's true. I wasn't surprised by the data in Singapore that more people live alone. That's well known here. Or more people don't live alone. They mostly live with their families. That's probably something that's somewhat true across other countries in Asia as well, that you might have looked at. So I think that'll be an interesting stratification, because it's a very different means but different set of experiences that people access as they get older compared to Western countries, where, my parents and they're still alive and they're not going anywhere. They're living in their house. And, my grandparents are the same way. So, the Western mindset, I think, is quite different. So it'll be interesting to stratify by that variable and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think that were there any? I'm just curious. I'm going to bring out my nationality here. Were there any insights that you may not know yet? You're still analyzing, but I'm wondering what came out of the analysis in the U.S.
So from memory, higher self-reported spiritual health status. And we want to look at that by gender and demography to try and understand what that could be related to. We actually asked a question around belonging to an organized religion and want to see how the responses vary based on those that are and that do and don't identify with that. Mm-hmm. Financial status was very important. I think it was number 2 in terms of the strongest driver, as well as having managed stress levels. So as interestingly as I'm an American living in Australia, stress did not appear in the top 1 or 2 buckets in Australia, but it was very strong across all 4 dimensions of health in the US.
Yeah, somehow that doesn't surprise me. The US, I'm not sure what to compare the US to. It's kind of a unique situation. But I'm curious about that. So, I think that I just want to touch on one more thing, and then maybe we'll start have some questions. There's a lot of questions out there, so we should have plenty of interesting discussion. But this untapped labor pool concept, that seems particularly important in countries in higher income status because they also have lowest birth rates. And so like Singapore is not only worried about 25% of the population over the age of 65, but only 2 workers for every retired person. So I think, and yet, there's in some segments of the workforce, they still encourage people out of the workforce at a certain age, like many other developed countries do. So, how do we think about that? How do we tap into that workforce? Yeah. And does that mean retraining people, new jobs, new things? It's not just keeping them in their job longer, I assume.
Definitely retraining and skilling is part of it, and that lends itself really well to that lifelong learning element. There's also promotion of quality jobs for older people and removal of or reduction of ageism. And what we're really hoping to do is use the data from this survey to inform how the Healthy Aging Initiative from McKinsey Health Institute focuses next. So what we've done in parallel is, as I mentioned at the start, looked into the topic of societal participation quite in depth into those sort of topic areas, employment, volunteering, et cetera, in depth. And what we found is that although employers, majority of employers say that they want to have good diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and they're against ageism, very few have initiatives specifically targeted to creating intergenerational workforces or age-inclusive workforces. And when we looked at the data for what actually drives, what is effective to drive intergenerational or age-inclusive workforces, we found that it was scant compared to, for example, the evidence base around gender. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking about doing next is testing what is specific to what specific interventions work in which contexts, and create some fact base and some examples and case studies that can encourage employers of all types in all places to sort of change some of their practices and promote this inclusion where it's appropriate for older adults. And we think that this is a special moment of time, particularly with workforce shortages across different sectors, to be exploring that. And I think we're really just at the start of those workforce shortages, in part because of the shrinking birth rate that you mentioned.
Yeah. $4 trillion in from a broader perspective is just the tip of the iceberg too, because healthy seniors travel more, they spend more money, they put more money back into the economy. And so I think that the amount of savings with increasing health span is, everybody asks me exactly what that is. And I'm like, I'm not sure what the number is, but there's a lot of zeros. so probably that's not a satisfactory answer to McKinsey, but it's what I get by with. So maybe what I'll do is bring Jessica in, and we have a lot of questions. So we'll just get to some of the questions from the audience.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you, Hemant and Madeline, for sharing your insights. So I think maybe the first question we can go to is the audience wants to know, how do you explain or how do you define purpose in your survey? Because they say that purpose is subjective. So when I guess people are taking the survey, how would they understand that question?
Yeah, our definition is around having a meaning in life and something to which to contribute. And we can publish the specific definition that's used in the survey. So we say purpose, and it is related to meaning, and it's up to interpretation beyond that point.
Great. Maybe Jessica, just as we were mentioning earlier, actually, I see in the question it was mentioned itself. So we try to define it, but not too much, because it is actually individual and subjective. People can find purpose in various ways. So we left it at an interpretation of anything which gives you meaning and provides you direction, but it is by definition going to always be subjective.
That makes sense. The next question the audience has is, how does the McKinsey Health Institute plan to use the data obtained from the survey in a meaningful way to promote healthy longevity?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we mentioned before is to feed some of the initiatives and campaigns that we plan to participate in. So knowing that purpose is so important. What can we do to create a better evidence base around that and help drive interventions that promote purpose, for example? But as in addition to that, as Hemant introduced in earlier in the presentation, everything that we produce as MHI will be publicly available and open source. So all of this data, the survey, the questions, the translations of those questions will be available on our site for others to use, build on, interpret, create their own cuts. And our hope is that increased access to data like this will help catalyze further research in the area.
That's great. That is actually the next question that the audience asked. So that's awesome. That's answered. And the next question is, so like you mentioned, the data can be stratified in different ways, but in terms of implementing these changes, should we take a one country, one approach solution, or should we go based on high, medium, or low income, or like you said, like the younger age group, older age group, or a different grouping for implementation?
So I think it depends on the intervention. There are a lot of organizations that operate cross-country and even cross-country archetype. And so when we think about the stakeholders to influence with this type of information, it's around private sector, governments and public sector, NGOs, and also individuals. And the interventions, I think, will vary based on the stakeholders that we want to drive change. What we've heard is that there's a big opportunity, particularly for employers, to drive healthy aging through workforce interventions. And we think that that's quite a promising avenue to be able to influence on a global scale. I don't know, Hemant, if you have anything to add on that one.
No, I think, Madeline, you're right. And for sure, there's a role, I think, as Brian was saying earlier, for sure, there's a role for governments to think about what they can do policy-wise, involving people more. And again, I want to take a broader view. We kind of get focused on purpose, but there is a broader list. I think, as Madeline mentioned, we have more than 40 indicators we looked at. And many of them are actually largely influenced by governments and policies. So there's a bit of a mix across, but I think you've got to, there's going to be multiple stakeholders. Some of them going to be cross-cutting across countries for sure.
Right.
Madeline, if I can jump in really quickly on that, I've been involved with a few employers that were trying to think about healthy aging, and it's almost all in the context of wellness programs and diet and nutrition, which is I think is all good, but it's really hard to get them to talk about ageism and how you effectively engage employees as they reach older demographics. What's your experience? Can you give me examples of like companies that are actually taking that problem on effectively?
So in Australia, there's a company called Bunnings, which is like Home Depot. It's very important culturally to Australians, and they employ older adults in a retail capacity, in part because they are retired and incredibly knowledgeable, usually from trade backgrounds. And they have something called the Silver Nomads program, where you can work at a Bunnings as an older adult, and you can work at any Bunnings across all of Australia, because it's common for older adults in retirement to get in a combi van with their families and drive across Australia for months, years at a time. And so Bunnings provides temporary employment that gives them a sense of purpose, something to look forward to in the next town, also a source of income. And Bunnings, what they get in return is a really knowledgeable, really respected and valued employee base. So they stand out, at least here, for engaging older adults in creative ways. We talked about a little bit earlier that idea of the mid-career counseling and transition support. We're also interested in testing other older adult or age-inclusive specific interventions. Things that we're excited about are phased roll-on and roll-off programs, support for caregiving breaks, flexible programs, and jobs roles that are designed for adaptability. There are many other potential interventions, and we think that we'd love to create some evidence around how they impact the employee themselves.
The next question is, how ready is our society now in adapting towards a longevity society rather than an aging society, based on the perceptions that you saw in the survey?
That's a really tough question, but what we did ask is a few questions around interest in using technology and barriers to using technology. And in summary, interest in using smartphones and mobile phones was very high in the 55 to 65 plus cohort, like in the 80%, which starts to tell me that penetration in digital literacy for mobile phones is approaching almost the maximum, particularly in high income countries. And so to that extent, the fact that our older adults are more able to engage with the internet and through apps and these kinds of things tells me that they're going to have more access to technology and innovation than they have had in the past. At the same time, there are structures in place, like we alluded to earlier, that force early retirement. There aren't structures in place to welcome people back into the workforce after they've lost a job or taken a caregiving break. And so I think that there are massive structural barriers to overcome to engage, to enable that more of a longevity sort of societal structure.
And maybe if, Jessica, if I may, I think the other thing, because I think at a society level, and Madeline will correct me if we looked at the numbers on what's the percentage of the population above 65 and just how it evolves, right? And I think we're slightly south of 1 billion right now, 800 million odd, and by 2050, this will double. And if you're close to a 1.6 billion population, that's 16-17% of the population. So by definition, I'll go back again to Brian's point. This moves from something we have to deal with as a challenge or as a problem or manage to an untapped opportunity even more. So to the question of how ready is society, I think progressively we just will automatically become more ready because we're living longer. The number of people who are living longer is increasing. They're living healthier lives, and there would be a demand for doing more with that time than just kind of get by. So at least we see this not as something which is a choice. It's just naturally going to happen just given the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that 1.6 billion, by then they're going to be stratified all over the world. It's not only in the Japans and the Northern Europe and Singapore, et cetera. It's going to be in Africa and South America, and the challenges there, are probably going to be different than the challenges we're facing now in societies that already have a high percentage of people over 65. So I think one of the important things from this survey is to start to tease out what are the unique features in lower income countries that are going to be challenges for aging population, and what are the, maybe some hint toward what some of the unique solutions might be to that challenge as well.
Yeah.
So the next question is more for the audience listening right now. They're asking, what are some ways that they can use these insights to improve their health or that of a family member who's of an older age?
Invite your parents to live with you. It'll help them. No, but thinking about that seriously, one of the 6 shifts, as Hemant mentioned, the 6th shift actually is around empowering individuals. And so I think with these findings, we can empower individuals to engage in society more and through different means, to become closer to those around them, and to maybe spend more of their time on something that provides meaning, so that they can continue to drive a positive impact on their own health.
And by the way, if I may, I found one thing very interesting again in the Q&A. There's one of the participants wrote in that I'm an 80-year-old individual and I would love governments to publish a list of places which are looking for elderly to either volunteer or to be part of the employment. I think that's a perfect idea and a great example of that 25% that we had in that group who are actually keen to contribute but don't know what to do. One example which has motivated me over time, I read about this a few years back. An FT journalist, a lady called Lucy Callaway, has talked a lot about how she did a mid-transition shift, went from being an FT journalist to actually start teaching. And, I follow her articles which come up every once in a while where she's giving an update on how that is going. And she had, I think, tried to create a group of people who are inspired by the same idea. And this is, over time, I don't remember exactly at what point of time in her career she made the shift. But it's, again, another great example of people rethinking what they want to do, finding purpose which works for themselves, and then using that to continue to be actually socially included or be part of society, giving back. So I think there are many examples. I have a feeling, in addition to Madeline's pitch for invite your parents to live with you, I would say ask elderly people what they would like versus trying to suppose for them, and you would find more examples.
Yeah, and you can invite your parents to live with you, but don't over control their lives. There's a tendency in Asia for the children to make decisions, and I think that should only be done in situations where it's a necessity. Keeping older people empowered is giving them decision making. I've been telling people on interviews, it's like, let your parents go out and play. It's okay. It's Singapore. It's like the safest place in the world.
Brian, I have both my parents are thankfully still around and in reasonably good health. My father's in his 80s. And I don't remember the last time I took a decision for him. So, there is no risk of that.
I gave up trying with my parents in Kentucky. Jessica.
So Singapore has a reskilling program. I think, Madeline, you mentioned that having a public health structure is also very important. So from your observations and insights, are there any countries you believe are doing a good job in preparing for the socio-economic opportunities and impacts of a population that is living longer that could be modeled upon?
I think Singapore is a really great example. We had the benefit of visiting on a roadshow in November, and I think we visited around 8 organizations, all looking at healthy aging from a different perspective, from the MOH to AIC to different philanthropic organizations to startups, and or the Queenstown precinct, which is really ambitious and really impressive. I think that Singapore is really a shining example. And what we've looked at when we did our research is we looked at sort of those stakeholder groups that I mentioned and those buckets of those types of societal participation, and we find great shining points within some buckets, but it's not true. It's not something that's widely adopted. It's not something that's widely driven as a priority, and we think there's an opportunity to sort of fill in that heat map across different types of societal participation and across many stakeholders.
Thanks for bringing out Singapore, the checks in the mail. So.
Thank you, Brian. By the way, one idea we are interested in, at least we think about, and as Madeline said, we've been going at it for the last year or so, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of great thinking on healthy aging. So, we are just one voice and one very small actor in the. So we are looking for actually people to partner with. The one thought we are intrigued by is because there's a question which is on countries, but it's about cities as well. We are actually now at a tipping point in our history that more people live in cities over time now than not. And how do you even think about the idea of, I think of it as healthy cities, and you take a collection of cities, understand what works, and not the same thing will work everywhere for various reasons, of course, but try to pick up a few ideas which can actually be implemented across as many cities as possible. And even if you pick up 5, 10, 15 cities to begin, to Madeline's point of, how much of that heat map you can cover, and scale up things work and adapt them where needed, that can be quite powerful. And that will require governments, local civic authorities, local business or private players, academic institutes to come together. So one of the many ideas we've been thinking about and how to invest, how to push that further.
Do you think the current amount of, let's say, public-private partnership is good enough? It's too little, and they should keep on improving throughout the years using the insights from this survey?
I think it's safe to say we are at an incipient stage, right? I think there's some interesting things happening. Clearly, just given the scale of the opportunity here, much more can be done. Again, I would just underplay, look, the survey will be one voice added to it. It's not building on this survey, but again, there's a lot of great research out there, a lot of people doing a lot of thinking. So it's all of that coming together, and we just need to scale up some things, have more collaborations, frankly. I think there are some public-private partnerships. Again, Madeline's done some research on this, and we have published some of those in our article, but we should be thinking about many more, without a doubt.
I noticed that your timeline goes until May this year. What are some of the plans for short and long-term plans for the McKinsey Health Institute in the next, 5 or 10 years after the survey?
I can answer the sort of few-year horizon, then throw to Hemant for the decade-long horizon. So the slide that we showed earlier around going to May was really for our survey publication, our survey findings publication. So that's in no way indicative of the length of our focus on healthy aging. What we intend to do is take some of the data found from the surveys and work with partners to drive that change that we want to see in terms of expanding healthy age life expectancy through interventions that drive healthy aging. So it definitely won't stop once we do the publication in May. In fact, it should grow through our efforts and through partner efforts as well.
Yeah, and I think on the long term, look, in the introduction to the Health Institute, we talked about this, at least from a McKinsey point of view, as an enduring institution. We look at this as a long-term commitment to promote the idea of health across the 7 themes. By the way, healthy aging, as we discussed, is one of the cross-cutting ones within that. And, realizing it'll take multiple different actors to come together, we see a commitment from our side to continue to add to the data, add to the dialogue, bring more insights where it's helpful, and then partner with others on ideas to scale up. So we plan to play both a role in insights as well as activation through other partners and form coalitions.
Maybe Jessica, we can go to one more burning question.
Okay. So one of the most upvoted questions are, what about older people who prefer living by themselves and like to live alone? Were there any insights on their perspective or quality of life because they don't live with any family, except maybe a pet?
We haven't gone into the data in a lot of detail yet. I look forward to segmenting those that live alone and those that live with their partner and those that live with their children and seeing what different dynamics are at play. We're just in the early stages of looking into the data, but that will be something that we look into.
Well, I'll just mention that there is data from other research that pets are actually quite important, since you mentioned to people as they get older.
Plants.
And plants. Yes. Yep. And so for people living alone, you may have just thrown that out there, but it's probably true that there's quite a bit of data on that. So Hemant and Madeline, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you back again when you have more of the survey results in, and we'll get a whole new set of insights. And so that'll be great. I want to remind people to use the chat function and panelists and all attendees option to leave comments on the show. This show is a bit different from our others, so we're very interested in how you feel. We can always have more conversations on topics that we discussed tonight if you're interested. Look for news from our center and the School of Medicine and the in credits, as well as the QR code from McKinsey's if you want more information. We're constantly looking for new members who are really excited about longevity that want to join our team. There's a QR code if you're interested as well. And there are many other videos from the NUHS Center for Healthy Longevity, as well as all of the shows from our webinar. There's videos from our full-day conference last year at Alexandra Hospital that you can find as well. Our next episode will be March 16th next week, and we'll have Harold Pincus, who's from the co-director of the Irving Institute of Clinical and Translational Research at Columbia. We haven't gotten a title yet, but I'm going to promise you it's interesting. He's a great guy. It'll be great to have him on the show. I'll be with you next week. And I'm going to leave you with a video of a 43-year-old mom who looks identical to her 20-year-old daughter. You can guess which is which. Thanks for joining us, and see you next week.
This is just, you get ready, because this is crazy. I'm kind of angry inside. I needed a minute. I was like, I didn't believe it was real. But you have to take a look at these two ladies. So pretty, right? I mean, next level. Pretty isn't even, yeah, whatever. They look like they're best friends, right? Or sisters, perhaps cousins. Nope. These two recently went viral because this one is 20. She's a 20-year-old college student, Madeline. Look at her living her best life, being all fantastic. And this one's gonna, you know what? Get ready, y'all. This is her mom, a 43-year-old teacher. Where is the fountain? Like, did you find it of youth? Like, did you find it? Are you hiding it? Like, what do you do?
Well, I've always lived a pretty healthy lifestyle and taken care of myself. I rarely ever drink alcohol, and I don't smoke. So, and when May was younger, she was a competitive gymnast. And that really, really motivated me to working out and taking care of myself. as far as my skin goes, I've always been acne prone. And so since I was about 12 or 13, I was always messing around with my mom's skincare. And so like since my 20s, the three things I've always used is glycolic acid, vitamin C, and retinol. I don't know if you've heard of those, but retinol is great because I do feel like it's helped with my lines and hyperpigmentation and just like the glow of my skin.
Oh my gosh, I'm buying it all now.
I'm feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down.